because President Trump last night addressed the nation for the first time since starting a war with Iran. The 20-minute speech was meant to sell Americans on why this conflict was necessary, but he actually gave very few new details and repeated his vague timeline for when this war might end.
For these terrorists to have nuclear weapons would be an intolerable threat. The most violent and thuggish regime on earth would be free to carry out their campaigns of terror, coercion, conquest, and mass murder from behind a nuclear shield. I will never let that happen, and neither should any of our past presidents. This situation has been going on for 47 years and should have been handled long before I arrived in office. Many Americans have been concerned to see the recent rise in gasoline prices here at home. This short-term increase has been entirely the result of the Iranian regime launching deranged terror attacks against commercial oil tankers in neighboring countries that have nothing to do with the conflict. This is yet more proof that Iran can never be trusted with nuclear weapons. They will use them, and they will use them quickly. Iran has been essentially decimated. The hard part is done, so it should be easy. And in any event, when this conflict is over, the Strait will open up naturally. It'll just open up naturally. They're going to want to be able to sell oil because that's all they have to try and rebuild. It will resume the flowing, and the gas prices will rapidly come back down. Stock prices will rapidly go back up. I've made clear from the beginning of Operation Epic Fury that we will continue until our objectives are fully achieved. Thanks to the progress we've made, I can say tonight that we are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong.
So 2 to 3 more weeks, and notably, he wasn't calling it a war, instead a conflict. We'll dig into that, why it's important. But this felt to me like a speech that the president might have given at the start of this conflict, explaining to an American public already skeptical of action in the Middle East why we had to do this in the first place. Now we are 5 weeks in, and the explanation is coming now. It's a bit muddy. Meanwhile, Trump's threat to continue striking Iran for weeks sent shockwaves through the world financial markets, with oil prices surging and overseas markets plunging shortly after the president's address. Asian markets reversed earlier gains, with all major indexes down following Trump's speech. Crude passed $100 a barrel after Trump promised to hit Iran extremely hard, while also claiming the war was nearly over, but providing no concrete timeline, again, for an end to the fighting. Meanwhile, U.S. markets are poised to open in the red, with the Dow, NASDAQ, and S&P 500 futures all in negative territory ahead of the opening bell. And oil prices continue to rise, with benchmark crude markets here and overseas remaining well above $100 a barrel. And you heard the president at one point last night say it'll just open up when talking about the Strait of Hormuz. Interested to see how that just might happen, but it comes as more than 30 countries will meet virtually today to discuss ways to get heavy traffic moving again through that strait. The Associated Press reports today's meeting is considered a first step to be followed up by working-level meetings of officials to hammer out the details. Nearly all traffic in the waterway has been shut down due to mines and Iranian attacks on commercial ships. The meeting will be chaired by the United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary. The U.S. will not attend. Meanwhile, missiles continue to rain down this morning across the Middle East as Iran remains defiant following the president's speech. One Iranian official dismissing the remarks Trump made as insane, while the country's military says the war will continue until the U.S. and Israel face permanent regret and surrender, according to state TV. Those words being followed up by attacks. The Israeli military issued at least 4 reports of live fire in the early hours today, following a barrage of strikes last night in Tel Aviv, while citizens celebrated the first night of Passover. Authorities in Abu Dhabi also say they intercepted a missile near an industrial hub this morning. And the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad is warning that Iran-backed militias may attack there in the next 24 to 48 hours, urging Americans to leave the country. Israel, meanwhile, continues to fire back, launching strikes toward Tehran as video shows streets lined with destruction and debris. And the Israeli military is ramping up its offensive in Lebanon as well, with the country's health ministry saying yesterday more than 1,000 people there have been killed so far, including more than 100 children. The toll of war is so steep. I want to bring in MS Now White House reporter here on set with me, Akayla Gardner. Akayla, I think the question that I was asking as I was watching the president's remarks is why are they doing this now as opposed to at the start of the conflict? It really felt to me like this could have been something that assuaged a skeptical public early on, maybe.
Yeah, I think a huge part of the reason why we're at this moment is about the next phase of the war. There has been huge speculation whether the president could deploy troops on the ground. He notably did not address that last night, but I think that is really the next step and the next question that a lot of Americans have is, are we going to see more deaths of U.S. soldiers in this war? And he didn't really speak to that. One thing that I also thought was notable is before the president gave this speech, I was told that he was going to be reiterating this 2 to 3 week timeline. He did not exactly do that. He said that we're going to be hitting hard in the next 2 to 3 weeks. He did not say the conflict would end in 2 to 3 weeks. And we're now at nearly the 5-week mark. And as recently as last week, the White House was saying that this could last for as long as 4 to 6 weeks. So we're really running up on the timeline that they themselves have laid out. And so potentially this could be lasting longer than the original timeline that they've projected to the American people. And you also really had the president not seeming optimistic about diplomacy. He had literally maybe one sentence in the entire speech where he said negotiations continue. It seems as though his goal is really to just obliterate the shield of the nuclear materials that they have. And to me, that also suggested, are there plans to actually extract that uranium that they seem to really want? It seems like they're trying to move the goalpost to just attacking their Navy, to their Air Force, their missile infrastructure. And that is a huge question, because if you're going to continue to say that Iran is a nuclear threat, then how are you going to eliminate that nuclear threat? And he did not explain that last night.
It felt to me like we saw a preview of the benchmarks that the administration wanted to point to as successful from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, even just a few days ago, talking about hitting their Navy, obliterating their missile stockpiles, not really engaging with the question of the futures of their nuclear program.
Yeah.
Rubio also did a fascinating sort of preamble to Trump's remarks last night. I wonder what you make of them, what he said, how we should factor that into our thinking.
Yeah, that was new language that we saw, this language of the shield around their nuclear materials. And again, I think it really goes back to potentially that first speech that Trump gave on Truth Social, where he laid out these various military targets. But the president also last night said, we've achieved regime change, which is just not true. We have the son of the former Supreme Leader in power, who many people say is potentially more extreme than his father. He also contradicted that and said potentially he's less extreme than the former leader. It certainly seems as though they are trying to move the goalposts that the president himself laid out. And in that first announcement, he said he called on the Iranian people to rise up against their government. And he has really backed off of that. And I think there's a huge question that now we are at 5,000 deaths in the region. And the Iranian people may be in the same exact position that they were when this conflict began, and potentially not in any healthier of a system. This could be still an oppressive system by the time the U.S. leaves.
I wonder if we should also be making something of the fact that he did not use the word war. He continued to call it a conflict. It is that. But I wonder what we should make of that, especially when he asked Americans to put this in the context of other conflicts, but he was citing other wars.
Totally. I mean, at the end of the speech, that is really how the president closes out. He was comparing it to World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, all seeming to try to lay out a difference in the timeline that he expects. But it's not exactly encouraging. He's comparing it to conflicts that have lasted a year, in some cases longer. That is not totally encouraging, as the majority of Americans continue to say in polling that they think the war already has gone too far, that they want the U.S. to get out quickly. But in some way, he thought that was an encouraging message to leave Americans with, but it also comes at a time when MAGA supporters say that this is not what they asked for. They asked for an end to these forever wars. It seems that he is trying to persuade them that this is not going to be that.
Do you think that this speech is an acknowledgement of the White House's awareness of the polling, the skepticism from the Hill, the concern from the MAGA base? And is it too little, too late?
I think that's a great question. I think it remains to be seen, but that is exactly what I thought when I saw Rubio's pregame, if you will, to the president's speech, is he really opened this, saying if you're wondering why we're in this conflict, let me explain. And that comes
And Congress
more
has
than
been
a month.
demanding that, frankly, for a month.
Right, exactly. Lawmakers continue to say that in these closed-door briefings, that they're frustrated with the answers that they're getting. But it's 1 month into this conflict. It's too late to be explained to the American people. They're already confused, and they probably potentially are still confused after last night's speech.
Confused, and then also looking to their own daily lives where maybe they're pulling up to gas pumps and paying more to fill up their tank than they were before, in a political environment that, yes, people have an awareness of what's happening on the world stage, of what the U.S. is doing. But at the same time, people are focused where they're focused on their own lives.
Yeah.
And affordability still remains the #1 concern.
And the president last night called this the hottest economy in the world, which feels very detached from how Americans are feeling.
I think that's going to be one of our continued dual focuses here as we try to continue making sense of this. MS Now White House reporter Akayla Gardner, as always, thank you.